Preparing to live stream the meeting.
That's the bar that I see sometimes. It says we're live on my end.
See, that's the thing. That's why sometimes when you tell me that and I start talking, because I think it takes a little bit longer. So hang on, let me turn the volume down there. Hey, everybody. Welcome to UGA Sports. My name is Roddy Nabulsi. I'm joined by Dane Young. Big news. Georgia picks up Branson Robinson, the #1 tailback in the country. Power lifter, #1 player in the state of Mississippi. A fantastic pickup for the Georgia Bulldogs, allowing them to continue that moniker of running back U. I went down the list of guys they've signed since 2016, 2017. It is a ridiculous list. And he's a great kid. I mean, we can talk about how strong he is, talk about how fast he is, talk about the fact that it's tough to bring down one-on-one.
Those arms. You could talk about those arms.
Somebody just tweeted me a picture of a Hulk, the Masters of the Universe He-Man action doll. It said, I used to think this physique was unattainable.
You remember that photo of Elijah Holyfield from practice and then someone enlarged it to make his arms look bigger? Yeah. Those might as well be Branson Robinson's arms.
Yeah, he's the real deal. I mean, he's an absolute monster and a great kid. Georgia picked him up, and Georgia's been his leader for a while, but it came down to Georgia and Tennessee. I know a lot of people were worried about Alabama. I was a little hesitant to pull the trigger on the future cast thing because I knew Alabama was very, very into him. But then Alabama decided to cut their losses and look, the kid's very likely going here. We're not going to waste our efforts on doing that. We'll just face him in Atlanta. So, but Tennessee made a strong push to get him. And he actually said when his interview with Sam Spiegelman, it came down to Georgia and Tennessee. Dane, I can't imagine what the Georgia fans would have thought if this kid who's had Georgia as a leader and said if he had a good visit, he would probably go ahead and commit, wound up playing for the Vols and playing against Georgia.
Yeah, that would have been a meltdown over on the dog vent for sure, especially with the status of Tennessee football. I don't know how much that was actually in doubt. I'll be curious to see some more of the stories that come out from Branson Robinson. We always know in recruiting that just because a commitment happens doesn't mean that recruiting stops. So the fact that that quote is out there, I would imagine Tennessee is just going to continue to ramp up until he's officially signed. But Branson, from all accounts that I've seen, looks like he's one of those kids that probably commits, and that's that. From an overall 1,000-foot perspective, I know Ben Bachman's on his way to join as well, and he can probably give some more nuts and bolts of this because we've got guys on our staff that are a bit more of a specialist in recruiting. But in terms of the team perspective, I think the first thing you have to say is Dell McGee done went and did it again. I mean, this guy has just been ridiculous on the recruiting trail. The fact that he has remained at Georgia as an assistant coach and having the additional responsibilities beyond just running backs coach. I mean, he's just so good. Anyone that meets him and connects with him, they build that relationship. I can't think of many big time misses in recruiting for him. I mean, it's every single year. The other thing I would say, and I know this is not immediately connected, but getting a guy like Nakobe Dean from Mississippi opens up that pipeline where he's the guy his year in recruiting in that state. And then all of a sudden, the guys a couple years younger say, oh, he went to Georgia, huh? He didn't go to Ole Miss. He didn't go to Alabama. He didn't go to Florida or Texas or Oklahoma. He went to Georgia. Let's see what's going on over there. That's helpful. And that happens quick in recruiting ranks.
Oh, absolutely, because those guys know each other, and when you were, let's say you were in 9th grade and you start getting those letters and you start getting the invites to camp, hey, come tour. And it happens, 8th, 9th, 10th grade. You start really paying attention and you watch the class, the guys that are seniors, you watch the guys that are a year ahead of you. You go to these camps and you see them. And when you see a guy that you looked up to, which, a lot of the kids in that state looked up to Nakobe Dean, he's going to be a star on Georgia's defense this year. You're like, I could do that. We saw it with Miami. You started pulling 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids out of Miami. Then all of a sudden there's like 5 or 6 guys in there. Same with the IMG Academy. Tough place to get a kid out of, but when you get one, all of a sudden you got 3. So it's you're right about that.
But you also see that the relationship there when James Coley was at Georgia, that Miami pipeline was a little stronger than it probably currently is, and now Texas A&M is pulling some of those people. Yep. So that's my point about Dell McGee is that for whatever reason, and I'm sure it's him and his personality, and then the success he's had around the Southeast specifically. I mean, he's just money with the running backs.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think about it this way, George. we could talk about all the recruiters that Georgia has, and everyone says, "Oh, they've got a whole staff of recruiters." That's true, but there's like three alpha recruiters, three guys who put everybody else to shame. And I shouldn't say to shame, three guys who stand out above everybody else. Dell McGee's one of them. And now Dell McGee is free. Okay. He's got two running backs in his class committed. Now he's going to stay on, don't get me wrong. But this is now you can put him on an Eni White. You can put him on a Travis Shaw. You can put him on Mikael Williams, a guy from his area, and say, look, I know it's a defensive lineman, not even on the offense, but that's a kid that you have a connection with. We need some help closing the doors with these guys. We need Singletary. We need, another cornerback. So you can free up Dell McGee to go work on those guys, and that's big. My three alpha guys would be Dan Lanning, Dell McGee, and Kirby Smart. And that's not to, say the other guys aren't strong recruiters, but those three guys have been able to pull in some massive, massive talents. They're very proven. We're kind of hoping for a big year from Trey Scott this year. He's having a hard time because these defensive linemen, the fight for defensive linemen, it's a loaded class, but the fights for this year are unlike anything I've ever seen. They're just toe-to-toe battles. And it's true with the whole COVID thing, guys visiting, seeing schools for the first time, falling out of love with a school, falling in love with a different one. We got a kid that's about to announce at 5 o'clock here. It's 4:36. Dennis Sutton, an outside linebacker, defensive end. Georgia would love to get him. He's the number 11 player in the country. From what we were told, he's down to Georgia and Penn State. I think it's going to be Penn State, but it frustrates you when you can't get guys like that because you're in the final 1, 2, or 3 for them. But you did with Branson Robinson today. So I think that is the kind of the shot in the arm. Your Dell McGee, when the chips are on the table and you need to win, Dell McGee comes in, gets you that 5-star guy. Now you have Gunnar Stockton and him on the offense. They can turn around and turn to somebody else and say, hey, we need a blocker. We need a tight end, Oscar Delp. We need a center. We need a wide receiver. And, Gunner's like, look, who am I going to throw to? I can throw to Branson, but this is kind of a between the tackles runner. Come join us, Burden, and see what you can be part of this. So it just kind of
look at the running back position as a whole and kind of see where this fits in for Branson Robinson, because on its face, Georgia has 5 running backs right now, all pretty darn good players, but this is how quickly it changes, and you have to be so ahead of the game in terms of roster management. Zamir White and James Cook will be gone after this season. So that means that at the worst, Branson could walk in and be the 4th running back. And that sounds like, would a stud running back out of high school really want to do that? Well, Nick Chubb did, and that's the guy that he gets compared to a lot.
Yeah.
None of us thought Nick Chubb was going to play a lot his freshman season. There was Todd Gurley out there. There was Keith Marshall.
Yeah.
Michelle was in the same backfield, and then all of a sudden you get to that Missouri game, and it's Nick Chubb's show. I mean, things can happen, especially at the running back position. We think Kendall Milton is probably on his way to being RB1 at Georgia. Kenny McIntosh is right there beside him as well. Dejan Edwards has proven he can play some. But, when you start looking at some of the pieces that have come around, I mean, last year's running back commit is now a defensive back. So there is room there to kind of jump in and fill that spot on the depth chart. What I would say, though, is, when you start looking at Dejan Edwards and even potential Kenny McIntosh, and I think they love Georgia from all things that I'm hearing, but you just never know with roster management and how easy it is to transfer these days. Branson could walk into campus and be a number 2 running back. That's totally possible that could happen. He could also be the 5th running back. But none of that seems to be anything that he seems to be concerned about. All I'm saying is that Georgia is already looking ahead to, okay, we have to replace Zamir White, James Cook, Kendall Milton may be gone after next season. What's next? And Branson Robinson could be that.
Yeah, and you mentioned Lavassier Carroll. He's now working at defensive back. That was the running back they brought in last year. That was the only one. So this year, it's like, okay, you've got to take 1 to 2 running backs every year. And people say, well, that you might have up to 8. They won't quite get to 8, but they'll definitely want 5 on there. I mean, just to run practice. And I remember you point out the that rookie year for Nick Chubb. He gets the ball 38 times in Missouri. You had Keith Marshall injured. Todd Gurley suspended. I think Sony Michel was banged up, and it came to him, the number 4 running back, to lead the team. I remember Brendan Douglas having to carry the team there for a while. I mean, it's you can go deep down the roster pretty quickly. Same on the offensive line. That's why you signed so many of those. I thought Coach Donnan on our podcast last week made a good point. He's like, look, you have to have at least 8 defensive backs just to have a 2 deep if you're running a normal thing. If you have a nickel guy out there, now you got to have 10 defensive backs. And that's, again, only giving you a 2 deep. What happens if you have 1 or 2 guys injured? He pointed out that Georgia lost 2 to the NFL draft and 2 to transfer. Now you're down 4. Well, Kirby Smart pointed that out. And, when even though Georgia might have 2, 3, 4 secondary guys committed, you still got to flesh that out. You can't go over the numbers, but there's always need at those positions. And so Georgia has to get 2 running backs in this class. They got Jordan Bryant James out of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Jordan's a 5'10", 200-pound guy. Then they got Branson Robinson, 5'10", 218 pounds. I think you may be a couple biscuits over 218, but now you got your 2 running backs. So roster management, as we always talk about, is what Kirby Smart preaches. It's what he lives. It's what he breathes. And if you're going to bring 2 backs in, you like to have that hammer and tong type guys, and that's what they have in Branson Robinson and Jordan Bryant James. And I'm with you there. You're going to lose 2 to the NFL next year, and who knows what's going to happen after that. So I'm with you 100%.
I pulled some video of Branson Robinson for Trent Smallwood's film review, just seeing what he looked like in high school. And it's not always representative after a COVID year, just because so many things were disrupted. A few things I'll just say, just initial comments. And look, this is from a couple minutes of highlight film that I saw. It's different when you see these guys in person. Obviously, he's a between the tackles runner, downhill kind of a guy. Most impressive thing that I saw is that it's just so darn hard to bring him down, either from the lower body, he's strong there, and obviously if you try to do any kind of arm tackle up high, he's just so well built that he can break tackles easily. Arm tackles won't work against a guy like him. He's going to kind of inflict his will against smaller defensive players. He does not have breakaway speed. He is not that guy. People said the same thing about Nick Chubb, although it really wasn't true with him, because you see in the NFL against some of the fastest people on the planet, he pulls away from them too. So Branson may have another gear in that regard. From what I remember seeing of Nick Chubb at a high school, Branson Robinson's not quite as fast as Chubb was at that time. Again, this is all tough to compare. There's a lot of variables involved in it. He can catch the ball in the backfield. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the strength, but also if you're his high school coach, are you really trying to throw the guy the ball that much? I mean, put him in the middle and let him run. Any good coach is going to go try to win games that way when you have a weapon like that. So he's an old school looking football player, plays the game a little bit differently than I would say most modern running backs do. So I think he'll have some skill sets to develop in terms of catching the ball out of the backfield, maybe trying to do a bit more off tackle things. And then it all comes down to protection from there, because we know that if you're going to play running back at Georgia, you have to be able to help him pass protection.
I cannot imagine this kid jacking you up when you're coming on a corner blitz and you think you got him. He steps across the face of that quarterback to pick you up. And when he picks you up, it's going to be a literal pickup. This kid deadlifts over 720 pounds. He squats 630. He thinks he could go higher. He said he had a bench of 375, but it was a pause bench. He thinks he could go over 400. So, and he said that 630 squat was easy, or very easy. So this is a guy, I mean, he set in his weight class, when you take the 3 lifts, he did 1,720 pounds, setting a Mississippi State record for his weight class. The kid is just an absolute freak, but he's not overly stiff. Right? He's not going to be Kenny McIntosh or Sony Michel type of litheness, flexibility type guy. I mean, that muscle's got to go somewhere, so there'll be a little bit of stiffness there. But he's not as stiff as you'd think when you see a guy put up numbers like that. I usually think of a linebacker who can't touch his shoulder. His shoulders are so big he can't actually reach them. And can't turn his head because his neck muscles are so big. This kid isn't like that. We had him at the rivals camp and we made him run routes. He'd go up, he'd do a spin, cut out of that spin, turn to the right, catch a pass over the middle. But I'm with you. If I'm in high school, I'm not throwing him the damn ball. I'm tossing it to him.
Yeah.
Hey, let's get the whole line moving to the right. Here's the pitch. You find that crease and go through it. So
Well, and I say that he's the kind of running back that you just don't see as much in modern college football, and especially in high school. I say that as a compliment, really, because that means that George is now getting a weapon that most teams don't have that luxury, because there's not another guy this big, this durable, this willing to try to run through tackles that I've seen in the country, at least in this class. It happens every couple of years. You find guys like that. But I mean, he's got a very special lane that he can do. I'm sure he wants to increase some versatility that'll make him more marketable in terms of, well, not only NIL, but when you get to, the pros, what they're looking for. I just think that Georgia hit it. I mean, they hit this one out of the park. Del McGee did a great job in getting a really good player.
He's big. Hey, it looks like we have Ben Bachman joining us.
There we
Ben,
go.
how you doing?
I'm doing good. How about yourself today, Roddy? Oh, Dane's on here too. What's up, Dane?
Yeah, man.
Hey,
this is live on YouTube now, so don't cuss, okay?
Oh, yeah. I got it.
I may have already broken that rule once or twice, but Ben,
no, you can cuss if you want to. YouTube. There's no FCC over here.
Ben, give us your thoughts on Branson Robinson. I kind of mentioned some of his powerlifting numbers, but you've watched him. You wrote the commitment story about him, and let's give folks a little behind the scenes here. I think you wrote it 6 years ago that he was committed to Georgia, but
Yeah.
we took it out of the admin because there was the push from Alabama first, and then the push from Tennessee, and it wasn't until very recently that Georgia felt very comfortable about it. They were excited. They knew they led, but you never know what happens in recruiting. Hell, Georgia was leading for Dennis Sutton there for a while, and now it looks like Penn State's the leader. We'll find out here in about 14, 15 minutes. But point being, Georgia picks up a big commitment in the number one running back in the country, 5-star Branson Robinson. Give us your thoughts.
Well, first off, I mean, the thing was Georgia was the constant in the whole entire recruitment, because at one point Clemson was actually second, and then they told him he wasn't allowed to officially visit, which kind of eliminated them because their philosophy is you can only officially visit in the fall. Clemson recruits totally different than everybody else in how they operate, which ended it for them. But then Alabama made a push, then Tennessee got the last visit. So, but the one constant was always Georgia. Georgia was one or two or tied for the lead the entire recruitment. It was just making sure that they closed. And I think this is big for Del McGee. Branson, to me, clearly is the best running back in the country. A lot of people are going to compare him to Nick Chubb because you got to look at a Georgia running back. He looks a lot like him. But you look at how he runs. I mean, he ran, I believe it was a 4.48 or 4.49 at that size is impressive. Is the testing numbers I saw from him out of his high school. And that's, for a guy who's built like that, that's very impressive. And Del McGee last year, he signed a running back who might not play running back. So he kind of did need to get two key pieces here, and he got two of the best running backs in the country. So he's pretty much set for their 2022 running back class. Now it's on to next year with those guys. This is big for Del McGee and the program.
Ben, when you watched any game tape of Branson, did you see that kind of speed that you just quoted? Because I didn't at first, so that's why my eyebrows went up a little bit. I didn't see that breakaway speed.
The weird thing when you watch film is straight line speed. It's hard to correlate it. When you look at a guy's testing numbers and you look, because there's football speed and then there's just natural speed. Like when you look at a guy like Arian Smith, he has both of them. But when you look at a guy like Branson, sometimes you look at him on film and you say he's a tough runner. He's kind of a one-cut kind of back when a lot of people watch him on film. But then when you see him test at these camps, he's testing really well and even exceeding a lot of expectations. So it does surprise me because he doesn't look like he's a burner, which I think he's probably, when you really look at him, he's going to be a 4.5 guy, which is good for a guy that size. It's probably where he's going to be, and that's good for a guy that size. So I don't see the elite speed. That's probably the number one knock, but he doesn't need to have that. Kendall Milton doesn't have that, but for a guy Kendall Milton's size, he has more than
Todd Gurley doesn't have it.
That's the thing that he needs. Yeah, exactly. I think it's really how much you look at a guy who's that big, who's like a 6'2" runner. If he runs in the 4.5s, that's scary for a running back like that. Well, you look at Kenny McIntosh. I mean, coming out of high school, I think someone said he ran a 4.7. He doesn't look like he runs a 4.7. That's one thing it's really hard to evaluate in film. But yeah, he's not a burner, but for his size, he has elite speed for his size, I would say.
I want to give you all some numbers here from Sam Spiegelman. He mentions in one of his analysis pieces that injuries derailed Robinson's sophomore campaign in 2019, but he was able to bounce back to the tune of almost 1,200 yards and 16 total touchdowns last season. He had 6 100-plus yard performances while averaging almost 10 yards a carry. This past season, Robinson averaged 131 yards per game and a touchdown every 8 attempts.
That'll do.
And he played high classification football in Mississippi too. I mean, you're running for a first down a carry in that division. That's really impressive. And I know his team. I think his team might have been like 4-5 last season or somewhere close to that. So he didn't have the best team around him. He has some guys who are going to be Division I players, but his team wasn't there last year, and he missed the whole year. And to be able to come back and put up that kind of season is very impressive. That's why he's number one running back.
I'll give you my take on kids that come out of Mississippi. They're the toughest football players out there.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama has got some tough ones too, but Mississippi kids are just tough in general. Florida kids are fast. Georgia, to me, has the best combination of that. It's kind of that toughness as it goes from Mississippi, Alabama to Georgia. And then you have that speed of Florida going up into Georgia. To me, Georgia's just right. It's where you get the perfect combination. That's why they have so many top kids. But there's nothing like Florida's speed. You just can't get it anywhere else. You have to go to Florida to get those cornerbacks, get those wide receivers, find those kids. But there's nothing like the toughness out of kids in Mississippi. I don't know what it is about it, but and I think Branson Robinson is going to be the epitome of that. He's going to come in again. When you watch the tape, and I'm not a great analyst by any means when it comes to watching film and telling you what I see, but I did notice, and my whole thought is, well, who's he playing? I don't know this other team. Is this a 1A classification? Is this a bunch of kids that couldn't find their helmet with their head in it? But I started counting the number of kids that it took to bring him down, and it was never one guy. There was never a one-on-one tackle. And I was mentioning this when we did a TV spot with 11 Alive. The thing that impresses me, Ben, is when I watch the way the plays schemed out. There's a hat on a hat for everybody except the quarterback. Of course, he can't block somebody. So that means there's usually like one defender who's free, and that one defender has to face Branson Robinson either on the edge or in the middle, and it's his job to bring him down. And Branson basically becomes his own blocker. He either puts a move on the kid, puts the kid in the dirt, runs past him, runs through him, and now all of a sudden, as a defensive coordinator, you're like, look, I got my guy on their tailback. My guy's got to make the play, and his guy doesn't. And I think that's big. Because you'll see it in college, you'll see it in pros. At some point, the running back has to make a guy miss or has to break a tackle. And when I'm watching, again, it's just high school tape, but I saw the same thing with Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb got to these little tiny creases. When we had him at Rising Seniors, the coaches there said, look, we only have to give him a small crease and he's through it. And the defenders just can't get to him, or he breaks a tackle. I'm seeing the same thing here. Same thing with Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley broke a lot of tackles. No Sean Moreno would get hit. I mean, just absolutely blasted the line of scrimmage, but his hips would just roll out, and his balance and his vision to see, okay, if I go this way, I got a two-way go here. If I go this way, I'm going to be hemmed in pretty quickly. I'm going to go against the grain and take this odd angle. And sure enough, with his balance and his vision, no Sean Moreno just broke open giant plays. I don't know that Branson has that, but I was very impressed with the film I was watching. It wasn't just one guy bringing him down, man.
Yeah, and one thing I will say in football that's really undervalued is when you see like a play breaks down, especially a run play, and it'll be like a tackle behind the line of scrimmage, turns into a 2 or 3 yard gain, something that little. He can create that, and that's something that totally changes a drive. Because when you see you start out and it's 2nd and 13 versus 2nd and 7, because a guy broke a tackle or two in the backfield, made a guy miss or forced a missed tackle, and they only get a few yards positive. That's a big difference. And that's what he creates. Because when you look at him, most of the film you see on him, it does take multiple guys to take him down. He's down the field, and defensive backs are scared to tackle him because he has that lower sense of gravity that's just hard to tackle. And you just look, and it's impressive just to see other teams fear him basically when he's on the field.
I'm going to have to log off after this comment because I just have to run. But I do want to, Roddy, your point about Mississippi, I've got a bit of a theory on this. And I think it goes to a bit of like socioeconomic, right? Because I see this a bit in South Georgia too, where if you come from certain places and you get to the level that like a Branson Robinson is, you really had to work for it because you may not have all the same resources that some of these just football powers, the Hoovers and Thompsons in Alabama, or the Graysons or Creekside, you don't have just the massive set of resources everywhere. And I'm sure that his, school has plenty of those. But what I'm saying is, as a whole, the state of Mississippi, there's no massive hub, a city. There's no Birmingham, there's no New Orleans, there's no Atlanta. Mississippi kind of has to work a little bit harder in a lot of cases. And I grew up in South Georgia. I see that sometimes where it's the classic Herschel Walker story. We're like, well, how did he get to be so fast from Johnson County High School? Well, he was chasing horses. I mean, come on. Like, and his sister was a track star. So I get what you're saying, that like those kids tend to come to be a little bit tougher because they had to work a little harder to get what they got. So that'll be my comment. Y'all have fun, boys.
Thanks for validating me. I appreciate that. Hey, thanks for joining us, Dane. Hey, good luck on the
take
house.
care, Dane.
You know, it's you don't want to speak in generalities like that, but that's just what I've come to notice over the years, especially when we go to these 7-on-7s. We'll have a team out of one of the bigger cities. They are all decked out with all the gear, all the battle gear. You know, they got the nice cleats, and the team's showy. And you get a team out of Meridian, Mississippi, and they just put the smack down everybody because they're just better at them. And then the Florida team comes in, they just blow by everybody. So it's fun to watch.
Yeah, you look at some of the other Mississippi kids. Like I think, top of my head, I think Nakobe Dean might be the only Mississippi player on Georgia's roster. I could be wrong. There might be one or two others, but I mean, you look at Nakobe Dean. He's freakish in the weight room. All those guys in the weight room, just physical traits is what they have. They may not have the speed, but the physical traits, it's there. Like when you look at South Florida, and one thing that I noticed, especially about Georgia recruiting, since you brought that up, was in-state. There hasn't been an elite in-state wide receivers like littered in Georgia for a while. That's where you go to Florida in those areas. When you look at Mississippi, they just have athletic, freakish players, especially that are just grindy type tough players, like you said. Like you look at DK Metcalf, he came from Mississippi, and look at how freakish of a player he is. He's kind of similar to what Branson is in the weight room. So you look, that's where a lot of those types of guys go. And Georgia's kind of just the well-rounded guys who are just a mix of a lot of things. You get a lot of different things in Georgia because there's all different levels of high school football in Georgia, and there's all different powerhouses. And you see kids come from the lower schools from time to time. So that's another thing to watch. And also, I think when you look at Branson, back to him, I think he's very important in shifting momentum for this recruiting class where everyone was freaking out. Georgia missed on 3 IMG players and presumably in a few minutes denied Dennis Sutton. And everyone's freaking out. Oh, Georgia's missing on everybody. And one thing I will say is 2020 class, Georgia signed number 1. They missed out on like 3 of the top 5 players they at one point had a lead on. And just getting a few players shifts momentum. That one summer they got Marcus Rosemy, Kendall Milton, Cedric Bonpron. Going into the year, that shifted things big time for guys like Darnell Washington, who at one point Alabama, and some things like that. This is a kid that number 16 player in the country, top 20 player. Guys like Denylon Morissette, and a lot of the other recruits are really close to him. He's close to a lot of other recruits, Branson Robinson. It's really important to get that piece because they were really trending down in recruiting for a period of time, especially going into next week. Next week might be the biggest recruiting weekend until December because that's the last time. And I said, it's not the end all be all for recruits. I'm not saying if a kid visits, he's going to go to Georgia, or if he doesn't visit, he's not. But you get that last bit of face time, especially with a lot of these August decisions. If Walter Nolan decides in August and he shows up next weekend, that's huge for Georgia's chances. Guys like that, where next week you're getting the last face time before the season starts or before these guys end up committing a lot of them. So it's really important to get a kid like that potentially coming into town next weekend, help recruit for the class.
Yeah, let's see if he comes to town and he and Tyree West and Gunnar Stockton and Denylon Morissette, they all get together and sit down with Nolan if he's in town, or heck, they just sit down with we mentioned the news this morning. Kamari Wilson's going to be in town.
Mm-hmm.
You know, look, if you've got Tyree West and Gunnar and Branson Robinson, 5-star, 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 and they're like, hey, it's good enough for us. You know, we need you. It builds, and it's like, it's not to say that Gunnar and Morissette themselves couldn't get him on board, but it helps that another 5-star, another 5-star, another 5-star. Each one of those guys you bring, it kind of creates that momentum. So I think you're right. This was kind of the impetus to really help going into that. Now, we've been talking about this. I know Georgia's trying to get Travis Shaw down there. Everyone's trying to get Travis Shaw on campus, but I know Georgia's really trying to get him on the campus this coming week. If all of a sudden, you know, that same group goes up to him, of course, with Jalen Walker, one of his best friends, and get him in town too. And all of them are saying, hey, come be a part of this. It matters. You know, we had the story with the Oklahoma committed wide receiver, number 1 wide receiver in the country,
Luther Burden.
Thank you. I was going Luther Band.
He'll be in town.
Yeah,
Raheem
he
Singletary
will be in town. So all of a sudden, he's like, hey, I mentioned this to Dane. Gunner goes to him and says, I need a wide receiver. And Branson goes to him and goes, look, you don't need to be throwing me the ball. I'll protect the quarterback long enough for him to get it to you. And then when they start double teaming you, then I'll run up the middle and then I'll have to come back to me. And they start showing the plan. And Todd Monken's like, okay, this is what we do. And it's just a better sales pitch to have that 5-star on your commitment list before having Luther Burden in on next Friday for some cookout thing. I do want to mention some of the folks in the comments here. BJ Sims says Germantown High School is 6A, the largest classification in the state. Thank you. I did not know
That's
that.
impressive.
So if he's picking up a touchdown every 8 carries or so. He's not doing it against 1A football. That's good to know. The Sportsman says short area quickness is elite. Make people miss with subtle, decisive movements. That is such a good point. It drives me crazy when we just focus on 40-yard dash times. We always think about those kind of breakaway runs and stuff. To me, that short area, being able to hop, and we saw this at Rivals Camp. This kid's great between the tackles. He moves around, trying to get through the traffic. That is the difference between, as you were saying, Ben, being hit behind the line of scrimmage and stopped at the line of scrimmage, or picking up 3 yards. Give me 2nd and 7, 2nd and 6, instead of 2nd and 9, 2nd and 8. The plays are completely different. So if you can get that, or heaven forbid, ideally, give me 2nd 3, 2nd 4. All of a sudden now Todd Monk is like, you have no idea what I'm going to do at 2nd 4. What defense you going to roll out there? Because I got something for your ass now. So, but if it's 2nd 9, that's a much, much different ballgame. So that short area quickness, and we see that when the NFL draft comes to town, when they do all these tests, everybody knows that the 40-yard dash is going to get people's attention, but they love to see those L cone drills. They love to see those shuttles. They love to see that change of direction. What are your hips doing? How low are you getting in your turns? What can you do on your routes? Stuff like that. So I thought that was a pretty good one.
Yeah, one thing I'll also say, and this is, I know we have Brent Rollins here at UGA Sports who does Pro Football Focus. One thing that's emphasized there and at Georgia, which I noticed it's one of the big things about when Nick Chubb transferred to the NFL, was Kirby emphasized pass protection. That's something in pass pro where Branson is really good at. I had outside of elite speed, which a guy like that doesn't need it. A guy like James Cook, who's a smaller frame, he needs to have that elite speed, or else teams, they're going to say, you're not super fast. And when you're that small, taking hits, you're not going to last very long. You're not going to last past 3 or 4 years if you don't have the elite speed or any quality like that for a guy like James Cook. For a guy like Branson, short area quickness is important for everybody. He has that, and it's special. And that's actually the main thing for him. And I think the one question mark I did have with him, which at the Rivals camps he looked really impressive at, was pass catching. As a pass catcher out of the backfield, he was winning in one-on-ones at one of the Rivals 5-star challenges almost every rep. Where in his offense, I don't see him catching the ball too much. On film, sometimes you'll see some screens here and there, but he's not a guy you're ever going to line up or you're going to throw deep down the field to. But when we had him out there for camp, he looked impressive and out of his breaks. He looked like he can run routes. Quality for a running back with his stature.
Well, Jed May was out there. We have a great interview on the same YouTube channel. Be sure to watch it. It is a great interview with Branson Robinson. And he's also spoke to Branson's coach has retired. He'll have a new coach this year. We spoke with him, and he talked about some of the same things that you just mentioned there. To me, if I got that kid on my team, I'm not throwing him a lot of passes. I'm just, as I mentioned, Dane, I'm just pitching it to him and letting him go, just run people over, pick up those yards. I would be a horrible, horrible coach because I'd run the legs off of him in a heartbeat just so I could win. I mean, I can admit my ego would be like, yeah, I'm not worried about what's best for you. I'm worried about winning the game. But this kid, he looks fresh. But the word that was mentioned repeatedly was coachable. This kid is coachable. He's I know a lot of people say, well, he kind of reminds me of Nick Chubb. What was the best thing about Nick Chubb is that, Nick Chubb was coachable. You were able to say, hey, here's a better way to do this. I remember hearing one of his coaches yell across the field, hey, if you run that high up, you're going to get broken in half. And then all of a sudden, every time I saw Nick, he's leaning forward low and just grinding people underneath his feet. And he's taking that to the NFL. that's the thing. Again, I don't know. I don't want to pass judgment on what he can and can't do because we just don't know. But I'm thinking when he comes to Georgia and you get Dell McGee over there saying, okay, let's work on your pass catching ability. Let's run this. Anybody that's willing to put that much time into the weight room will put that much time into the jugs machine. We'll put that much time into getting those route trees right, getting them exact, making them crisp, getting those spins right, getting the turns, getting the depth. Every time when we go to practice, first week of practice, we'll see Kirby or Cortez Hankton or James Coley or Todd Munkett or somebody lose their mind that the routes that the wide receivers are running aren't the right depth. They're either too short, too shallow, too deep, take too long, and it is a precision game. I know people go, "Oh, well, it's a curl, it's an out route." No, the difference on running it correctly is the difference on being open or not. So I think that is a guy who, to me, when you're willing to put that much work into your craft, as we've seen with Branson Robinson, I expect to see the same thing on his pass catching ability. And again, if you can get Luther Burden, maybe you don't need to throw the ball that damn much. So let's keep our fingers crossed there just to see what if you could get that guy. I want to see it, not because I'm a fan of the team, I'm just a journalist, but I enjoy covering those games.
Yeah, because it makes it's a good problem to have, as they say. When you got receivers and running backs, I mean, whose mouth? I mean, there's only one ball to go around. JT Daniels said that. There's only one ball to go around, and that's the thing. Where I look at this upcoming season, Georgia's really deep at receiver, and it's going to be how many catches are you going to get? Are you going to get 500-yard receiving guys? Are you going to get a couple 1,000-yard guys? If you put Luther Burden and Branson Robinson out, is there a chance Georgia could have a 1,000-yard rusher who's, a Doak Walker Award winner? And could they have a Bolendikoff guy with them? I think it's a big sell when you look at the previous offenses in college football, that if Branson Robinson's there when Luther Burden is in town and they're sitting down, they're talking about things, saying, you look at what Alabama did with Najee Harris and they had those receivers. LSU had Clyde Edwards-Helaire and those receivers. They complement each other. And that's a big sales pitch. I know Oklahoma has some running backs committed. I looked into him. Malik Brown's a guy they might use at receiver, not running back. And he's a high-rated running back. So that's something that's intriguing because he's a smaller guy, but Lincoln Riley wants to use him in the slot, I saw. So it's when you look at a running back like Branson, who also Clyde Edwards-Helaire is actually a good comparison for him as well. He reminds me a lot body type like him and how he plays kind of one-cut guys. But you look and say they complement each other, and that's something that would be very important. And swinging a guy like Luther Burden, I think this is, like I said, with a guy like him, is a pivotal weekend because you enter the season, we're not going to see visits until games start in the fall. He is over a month, and the last impression is Georgia, and it's an unofficial. And he already confirmed with us a month ago he's going to be back for an official in the fall sometime, whether for a game or in December. Either would be very good for him, for Georgia as well, to get him for either a game or get probably his last visit if it's in December. It's really big shaping up next weekend. And I think that's one thing to watch Travis Shaw and Walter Nolan as well. Do they make campus? So recruiting right now, this could be in the next week, could be a big swing for Georgia.
I agree 100%. All right, that is about all the time I've got because we've got Danny does something actually committing live, so we will go check that out. And a lot of more coverage coming from UJ Sports. Again, we have the an exclusive video interview with Branson Robinson on our YouTube channel. Please go check that out. Hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell for notifications. We do a lot of this stuff for free. We're more than happy to do it. All we ask is that you subscribe to the channel so that we can tell our sponsors and tell our folks we got a lot of subscribers. So it really helps us a lot when you do that. And we do think that this format, a lot more YouTube stuff is going to be. We can do a lot more when we have the resources to do it, and all we need are your subscriptions, little button pushes. So we'd greatly appreciate that. And thanks to Dane for coming on. Ben, I really appreciate it. Couldn't do this stuff without you. We got to have my recruiting analyst because, I don't know crap about recruiting. So I appreciate you being on, and we will.